Hi, this is Sarah Seamount, and today's mini training is on migrant services in MSIS. How do we figure out what those are, when to do them, when to enter them, kind of the when and the where and the how of entering services into MSIS for the migrant education program.
Oh, he did?
Yes. Everything is.
So the first thing to know is how to navigate in MSIS. This is going back to the very basics. Most of you already know this, but if someone's new, you might want to know how you can even find services in MSIS. So first you get into MSIS, actually log into the system. You do have to be assigned rights to MSIS, which is a state app, by your IC coordinator. So if you don't have, and we do have one new liaison who I believe started yesterday, and she may not be here for today's training, but she may be watching it soon. So all the information on how to get hooked into technology is on the FAQs on the migrant website for Idaho. So you log into MSIS. You will click on the District Migrant Summary on the navigation page, which is on the left side of the screen. So in this case, if I were at Bruno Grandview, I would look on the left side of the screen, see my district name, and just below that, I would see District Migrant Summary. Once I'm in the District Migrant Summary, I do have to select each student individually. In order to enter services for that student, you have to enter in to that student's record. Once you have selected the student, you will see the following tabs across the top. You will click on the current year data on the last tab and select regular term or summer term, and those look like that. So, once you're there, how should you complete regular term services? And we're going to go through this in some detail so you can kind of see all the pieces and parts that make it up. The regular term, in case you're wondering, is the regular school year as opposed to the summer term, which is summer school. So the regular term starts on the Services tab, starts with 4 IC attributes, and those are EL status, Title I status, Special Ed status, and homeless status. And those come from IC. So they're useful information to you to ensure that we're serving those children in the way that we need to, but you cannot change them here. They come from IC. This is just information for you. For the regular term, the next thing you will see is a verification date. That is the residency verification date, and it is a critical piece of data that you collect for each student each year. This date represents a date that you spoke with the parent and confirmed that they were residing in Idaho. This is our best practice. It means that we actually talk to every parent every year. We find out if the family has needs, if the students are struggling, if there are issues with a teacher, whatever's going on, this is the time to catch up with your families each year in the fall. However, sometimes that may not be possible. And so this date may also represent a date that the student was enrolled in school and not absent. So that is a distant second best. It's always better to talk to somebody in the family and find out what's going on with them. It is also a recruiting tool. I know when I was in a district that we would take the list of every single student we had, and we would start contacting those families in the fall. And quite often, it was very exciting when we got together for a meeting and we would go over the list and the liaison would report, I was able to requalify this family. Kind of a celebration. So please take the time, if you can, possibly do it, to contact the family. Find out if there was a short-term move over the summer as you're visiting with them in the fall. It really is worth the time. So here are the rules. The residency verification date must be on or after the 3rd birthday if the child is turning 3. It must be before the 22nd birthday. It must be before the end of eligibility and before graduating or getting a GED. So those are absolutely required. It must be on or after September 1st for the current school year and before August 31st of the current school year, because that is the end of our performance period. So these are a lot of dates to keep in your mind. And we'll talk at the end about kind of our final review at the end of the year and how the bad dates report can help you know if you have accidentally broken one of these rules. It will actually tell you which one it is so that you can, reach out, back out to the family or whatever needs to happen to get a good date. Sometimes there is no good date. The child moved out of state when they were 2, and then we just leave the date the way it is, even though that student won't count for funding purposes. The dates should always be honest, true dates that we know that the family was here or the child was here. So the next 2 things that you'll see under regular term services is you'll see MEP project type and then continuation of services reason. The MEP project type is the way that the state has chosen to set up their migrant education program. So for Idaho, we've chosen to set up our migrant education program as a strictly school-based program. That doesn't mean that every single district has it, or even that every single district or every single migrant student is served through a local school liaison. It may be a liaison from a neighboring district. We have a couple of districts that are arranged that way. It may be from a regional, but it is still, the funding is still sent through the schools. We don't provide funding to a not-for-profit and ask them to run our migrant education program, as some states do. We do it through the schools. So because that's the only way that we do our migrant program, we've pre-filled that for you. Continuation of services doesn't actually get entered here. It shows you what their status is, but it doesn't get entered here. It gets entered on the district migrant summary on the row for that student's name, and it cannot be changed here. So this is just a reference for you as you're entering services to be able to see if this student currently has continuation status. So regular term, here are some odds and ends. There's a whole bunch of boxes that are going to show up. One of them says referred services. It's a tiny little checkbox to represent something that is so profoundly important to our families. If you refer a child to a non-MEP paid service, meaning it's not paid for by us, then you can count that as a referred service. So some examples of that are the Lions Club for Glasses, food banks, government agencies, WIC, the Health and Welfare Navigator, the local clinic, a dentist that will do sliding scale work, whoever that is. It is not the school providing the service, and it's not MEP funded. And once you have ensured that the family followed through and got the service, then you can enter that referred service. And it's just a checkbox, and you can only do it once. But it is so critically important to our families. That's part of what we do. Priority for services. Our last mini training was on how you determine who is eligible for priority for services. However, we do fund double essentially what a regular migrant student would get for a student who has priority for services. So it is really, really important to make sure that that little box gets checked once you've identified that the student qualifies. Extended service, these are support or instructional services that are provided outside of the regular school day. So before and after school programs, resource centers that are available after school, that are available on weekends, any kind of weekend events or projects that you do to provide support or instructional services would count as extended services. Out-of-state transcript, this is something we added to MSIS because it is reported in M6. So if you have a student and you look in the CUME file and you see that they have, this high school student has a transcript from Oregon, then you would check the box that says you have one. And what that means is anybody in the M6 system that sees that could potentially call you and ask you to, tell them what's in there or send it as a fax or in some way get them the information. If the family states that their child is homeschooled, you would mark the box that says student is homeschooled. And it's good that that's only in there in the current year data, because it's every single year you will have to mark that box because families may change their mind. I had some nieces and nephews that were homeschooled, and then at a later time, the 2 younger kids ended up being enrolled in school for a number of reasons. And so essentially, you just want to check that box for this year only to say if the child is being homeschooled. That does not mean the child is being schooled through a virtual school. That is not the same as being homeschooled. If they're enrolled in an Idaho virtual school, then they are not homeschooled, even though they're learning at home. All right, still in the regular term, now we get to kind of the meat of what we wish we could do more of, and that's instructional services. And some districts are doing more because there are more funds available in some districts for the migrant program. Our numbers have gone up over the last 6 years. So for some districts, they maybe are able to provide regular instructional services paid out of the migrant program during the regular year. I think still more often than not, instructional services are probably provided in most districts in summer, but there are some districts that are providing that, so don't neglect to mark those. If the student received the instructional services, and that could be classes or tutoring or after school tutoring by either a teacher or a parapro paid out of migrant funds, you'll need to mark the first box. So that's teacher or para paid out of migrant funds. If the person in that first box was also a certified teacher, then you would mark if they were teaching math, reading, or credit accrual. If the person who's teaching the class, always out of migrant funds, or who is working with the student is actually a parapro, you cannot mark the box that has to do with mathematics, reading, and credit accrual. That is only if you're a certified teacher. Regular term, these are support services. So if the children, or in this, it should say child, I will change it before we post this. If the child receives support services of any kind by a migrant paid staff person, you would mark general. And there are some listed examples of what those might be. If the service was also counseling, then you would mark counseling as well. In the instructional services, those 3 types, the mathematics, reading, and credit accrual, are a subset of all instructional services. In support services, counseling is a subset. So if you have somebody receiving counseling services, that would include working with the student on helping them with scheduling their classes, working on their 4-year plan for high school, talking to them about colleges and FAFSA. This is not just emotional counseling like therapy, because we are not therapists, most of us, I would say, and are not trained to do that. Counseling is used in a more broad sense. So if the support service is counseling, you do actually mark both. It is a general service, but more specifically, it's a counseling service. Oh, and good news, it won't let you fail to mark general if you mark counseling. I think it will do it for you. Same with if you mark mathematics, it will also mark that the student received an instructional service from a teacher or a para. All right. Regular term enrollment comment. Enrollment comments are, relatively speaking, new. They've been in the MSIS system for about maybe 3 years, and it was added because this was a required minimum data element for M6. So when you think about the enrollment comment, think about this being something that other liaisons in other states and other cities will see if they look at the student. So think about the kind of things that you would want to know if you were, I imagine in my head, you walking down a hallway in a school, running into the liaison from the other state or district and having a conversation about the student. What would you tell the other person about the student's enrollment records and history with you? So it will help for people to understand, especially if there's something odd about the student's enrollment, how it happened and why. So I gave you a few examples. You can, I'm sure, think of others. A student went to Mexico for several weeks in winter when there was no farm work in the area. The district made arrangements for the student to take work with him and did not withdraw him. So it looks like he never left, but he did. So that would be a time where an enrollment comment would say, you might say, the student went to Mexico for 6 weeks due to lack of farm work in the area, and then put the dates. Because they won't see it in the enrollment record, but this will tell them that they did actually leave the area. Otherwise, it might look a little funny. Why did you requalify this student here? That's a curiosity. Another example would be a student moves to a new district, but continues to drive to the old district to finish her senior year. That happens all the time. Sometimes it has to do with childcare. Sometimes it has to do with high school students not wanting to leave their friends. This is not something like on a COE, we have certain comments that are required. This is not required. This is just being helpful. So you're helping that next person that might look at this record by putting in a note that says the student moved to our district, but continued to drive to the old district to finish high school or senior year, something like that. Another example, a student does not show enrollment for 3 years, nor is he homeschooled, but you happen to know he attended a private school. So you might put a note in that says the student attended private school from this year to this year. So these are the kinds of things that you can put in the regular term enrollment comment. It is not an absolute requirement. It doesn't have the gravitas of doing a COE and whether or not it's going to get approved. But just think of yourself as being super helpful when you put these kinds of comments in there. And we have asked, when the students are not unenrolled when they go to Mexico, we have asked that one for sure be included, just because it really looks odd when they get, especially when they get to M6, and we have continuous enrollment. All right, so we're going to move on and now talk about summer term. And I will say on the summer term ones, I mostly focused on what's different. We're not going to go over everything exactly in as much detail because you already have some of the information. The summer term is after the regular year is over, but before the next school year begins. Any of those times, we do not have specific dates. If your students finish on June or May 24th and summer school starts May 25th, that's fine. If it starts June 1st, that's fine. If it starts August 1st, that's fine. It cannot run past August 31st because then it would cross over into a new performance period. But I think it's pretty safe to say that most of our districts would never go past August 31st with their summer term. So here are some differences. In the summer term, you will see a place for you to enter dates. So this example came from a student that actually was in summer school and started attendance on June 3rd and finished on June 30th. And that is not to say that the summer school dates were June 3rd to June 30th. That says this particular child attended from June 3rd to June 30th. And the student only has to attend for one day in order to be counted, but you do have to have dates. And the reason for that, we were told when we were required to add those dates, is that we have to also be able to say that the student was eligible for the migrant program on that day in order to be counted for funding purposes. So if the student started June 3rd and their end of eligibility was June 2nd, sadly, we won't get funding for that student, but we still want to just tell it how it is. Whenever the student attended, their first day goes in as their attendance begin date, and their last day is their attendance end date. If you had a student that only attended one day, those two dates might be the same. So, and so this is, and it is more broad than just summer school. That's how we think of summer school. But in this case, it can also be a date that is when the student received home-based summer services. So some districts have provided in-home tutoring. So the first day that you would do a home visit, that would be your begin date. And the last day that you provide that service would be your end date. Or if you're doing a support service, remember we found out last summer that we can count support services as summer services, but that we should have at least 2 contacts. So if you have a support service that you're providing to a student or a family, well, it's always for a student, but in any case, when you provide that support service, you do have to have a beginning date and an ending date because you do have to have more than one contact. So those dates may be your first contact and your second contact. All right, so here's some other differences. There is a box that says attended migrant funded summer school. As of right now, for now, this box must be checked for any student to count as receiving summer services. That is that they will get uploaded to M6 as receiving summer services. We will get as a state for that student, and you will get funded as a district when we do our funding allocations for next year. So essentially, this box must be checked in order for them to count. However, it is misleading because it says that they attended summer school, and we've now broadened the definition of what summer school is. So we are working on an MSIS update that will include some changes to the system. And I'm going to ask that this box simply be eliminated as long as there is a begin date and an end date. And a service checked, that's really should be all we need to be able to say this student was eligible on their begin date. They came for at least one day. They received an instructional or a support service. We shouldn't need this extra box. But for right now, think of it this way. If this kid should count for summer school, for summer services, check the box. Ignore that it says summer school. And we're hoping that that'll get fixed soon. The enrollment comment, this is just, if you wish, you may want to make a comment if the student was served through home visits or virtually for credit accrual support rather than in a traditional summer school. That might be helpful information. And if the student showed up for one day and then disappeared, you might make a note to say that too, because it is probably a little more, not a red flag, but at least a yellow flag if a student shows for just one day. I mean, we know it happens, but that's one of the things that you could use the summer enrollment comment for, is just to make that note. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the timeline, because I know for many people, the timing on a lot of these dates are unfortunately at bad times of the year. So a lot of services that we need to enter, we need to double check. We're doing that in the fall. At the same time, we're at the very height of our recruiting period for fall harvest. And so I wanted to go over these so everybody knew exactly when these things needed to be done, in order to get them in there and make sure that they're all there before we roll over, and to avoid that last minute crunch, hopefully. So I've put in red what I think would be the ideal time. So residency verification dates, except for 3-year-olds, would ideally be done at the beginning of the year. That is super important. And it's critical to do these dates within the allowed timeframes. So we have to do it, here's the list again, before the 22nd birthday, on or after the 3rd birthday if the child is turning 3, on or after September 1st, but before August 31st, before the end of eligibility, graduation, or high school equivalency, i.e. GED date, and before the student leaves the district, which is also critical. So when you look at all the complication that comes with this, other than your 3-year-olds that you may have to revisit later, realistically, what this says to me is the sooner the better. The quicker you can get around to everyone, have that conversation over the phone is fine, the better. And the sooner you get them in the system, probably the better. If we don't have a residency verification date, we really struggle to be able to count a student. Sometimes we can make the enrollment and withdrawal dates work, but there's a lot of cases where we just can't. And it's so complicated that it honestly is just helpful to say, go out there, get those dates, get them in as soon as you can in the fall. Priority for services, we have it in your red binder in the instructions that ideally these returning students will all be considered for priority for services by October 31st. That's a somewhat arbitrary deadline. If you wanted to have them all done by September 30th, that would be just fine. But the longer you wait, the more likely it will be that a student's 12 months since their last qualifying move will be over and you won't be able to qualify them. So we strongly recommend getting those done by October 31st. For new students who are identified as migrant throughout the year, if you can get those, I would say within the first 2 weeks, get those figured out if they might qualify. Obviously they have the move, so they're halfway there. The question just is, do you have state test scores. And I know that may take a little time, or district test scores or other things. So, so if you can do it within the first couple of weeks, that's would be best. So regular term services, these are referred, support, and instructional services, should be entered as they happen or at least once per month. So if you are the kind of person like me who has MSIS open on your computer all day, every day, and you provide a service and you come back in and you sit down at your desk and you've already put it in your log, and you just go in and check a box, and then maybe you have a method in your log to, highlight it in a certain color to show that you've already reported it, then that's one easy way to do it. You could just do it as you go. Every, even once a day, you can look at it. But I will say that even if you don't do it that frequently, I would do it at least once a month. It's too easy as time goes on to forget and possibly to miss services that you actually did provide. So try to stay on top of it. And I would say once a month is the longest you should go. And so the other thing to keep in mind is if you had a student, Juan Gonzalez, and he already received a support service, you can only enter that once, regardless of how many times he receives additional support services. So the reality is it's easier later in the year. There's less times, less often will you need to go enter something, because you look at the students that you're serving and you're like, yep, already did that. Yep, already did that. Already did that. So you will know that you've already served many of your kids and won't have to go enter services after you've done it once. So for summer term attendance dates, as soon as summer school starts, for those who come on the first day, so at the end of day one of summer school, if somebody has time to go in and put the start date for every child that was on your attendance cards or lists or something that where they were there, I would do that just so you get them in there. And then for new students, each time you register, enroll, and start a new student and they attend a class, then I would put that begin date in for them. Do not enter dates before the students actually attend. Our students are highly mobile. So you could have a parent that you trust implicitly. They've been a wonderful partner. You know that they're fantastic parents. You know that they were super eager to have their kids attend summer school. I'm just saying, don't do it. Don't mark that child as coming on the first day, because if grandma dies in California, or if something else happens, or if, who knows what it could be, emergencies happen to all of us, then it maybe they don't come. And it isn't through any lack of, good intentions or any lack of, diligence on the part of the parents. It just became impossible. So please do not enter dates before the student actually attended for at least one day. You can, if there is a case where, you did get a date in there before and they didn't come, you can contact Julissa. You would have to call her and say, I goofed and I really kind of need this date taken out. She does have the ability to do that, but removing dates is hard, so don't enter them before they happen. And then for your attendance end date, you can enter that on the last day of summer school using the attendance records to capture the last day each child attended. I would not put in the child's end date even if they move away mid-summer school until the last day, because as we know, our families are highly mobile and they could leave and then they could say, we won't be back until August. And then they go to the place that they were going to go, and whatever work they had lined up falls through and they come right back. And now the student's back in summer school and you've got a date that's kind of an issue. So I would leave the end dates blank until the last day of summer school. But when you enter them, enter from your attendance records the last day the child attended. And it doesn't matter if they attended continuously. So if you're thinking, well, he was here, on the 3rd, and then he was here on the 20th, but he missed 6 days in between, that's okay. First day, last day, that's all that matters for this. We're not looking at the amount of attendance. We're just showing that they have attendance dates because we have to prove that they were eligible on at least one day that they attended. Summer term services. So summer term services, I would enter them as they take place, just because at the end of summer school, everybody goes home. And then who's going to enter those services? Are you going to do it in the fall? That's not an ideal setup when everybody is as busy as they can possibly be in the fall. So if you can, make sure to get your services entered as they take place. The cool thing about instructional services is for every child who starts summer school on that first day, you can put in not only their begin attendance date, but you can also check their instructional services. That'll save you one time of having to enter into each of these children. Support services should be entered after the second contact, because remember Sarah Martinez said that support services to count as summer services should include more than one contact, which I take to be 2 as a minimum. So after the second contact, you can enter that. And then referred services can be entered when you confirm that the service took place. So again, it's probably going to take 2 contacts, unless you went with them to the food pantry, in which case then you already know, and you can check the box anytime after that. So those are my suggestions on when to enter summer term services. And then I think we're just about to the end of the year review. And so no more services can be entered after we roll over the database in mid-September. Once we roll over into a new school year, everything, all of those things that you can enter now will be for the next year. They will know. So when you go in and look at a student after we roll over, you get a fresh slate with all new checkboxes that you can check for the current year, which means once we roll over, you really can't fix anything from last year. So again, this is something where in an emergency, you could call Julissa and she could help make those corrections, but it's better not to have to do that. It gets very confusing. So we really want to make every attempt to do an end of the year review. And so you're going to use your bad dates report to check that each student has a valid date. If a student has a bad date, that will exclude her from counting with the powers that be that give us our funding, it will give you the rule that was broken. It'll say this date after 22nd birthday, this date before child turned 3, this date after graduation, this date after end of eligibility, this day, so it will tell you what the problem is, because I don't know about you guys, but I hate comparing dates. It's the biggest pain. So the nice thing is we let the computer do the icky stuff and it'll just tell you, here are bad dates. Once again, if the bad date is the only date and the true date, then if the child left the state before they turned 3, then we leave the date that was when you knew they were here and we just don't count them for funding, and that's okay. That isn't a problem. It happens very seldom. I would say out of 6,000 students that we reported last year, there were maybe 4 or 5 kids that actually had a residency verification date when they were 2. We checked on those. In every case, the student had left the state, so therefore they weren't a resident after their 3rd birthday. And then I would say, if you can, maybe it's the very first thing you do in August, although I know a lot of people really dive right into recruiting, but if you can set aside some time each day and just go through the list one by one. You can print out your migrant student summary list, and then you can check them off as you go review all the data for each one. And if you only get to 5 kids today and 10 tomorrow, pretty soon that'll really add up. But I would check them off on the list so you can remember where you left off. All right, so that will bring us to the end of the recording. I will stop the recording and we will have plenty of time left for question and answer. Thank you for coming. And here are all the contact numbers and email addresses for me, for Julissa, and for Tanya. And the 3 of us are always, always happy to answer your questions. So with that, I will stop the recording.